Welcome to life stories, love, fate, and second chances. Sometimes, life brings people back together when they least expect it. 5 years ago, Emily Carter had a fleeting romance with a stranger, only to wake up alone, carrying a secret that would change her life forever. Now, fate has brought her face to face with James Harrington, the man who unknowingly became a father. But can the past be forgiven? Can two broken hearts come together for the sake of love and family? Stay with us as we dive into this emotional journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to begin today's story. The city shimmered under the glow of golden street lights, the distant hum of traffic blending with the occasional laughter spilling from upscale restaurants and bars. It was a scene of quiet beauty, of a world moving forward as if nothing was wrong. But for Emily Carter, the night was nothing more than a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She sat alone in the dimly lit corner of the Sterling Lounge, a high-end bar nestled in the heart of New York City. The glass in her hand was cool, the ice clinking softly against the amber liquid inside. Her fingers traced the rim absent-mindedly, lost in thought. She wasn't usually the type to drink alone. But tonight, she wasn't herself. Tonight, she wasn't the responsible, composed woman who always had her life together. Tonight, she was just a broken heart, nursing wounds that ran far too deep. The betrayal had come suddenly, shattering the illusion she had clung to for so long. The man she had loved for years, the one she had trusted with every part of her soul, had destroyed that trust in a single careless moment. She had walked in on the truth, bare and undeniable, and in that instant, her world had unraveled. Love, she thought bitterly, was just a cruel joke played by fate. Her gaze drifted over the bar, watching strangers lost in their own lives. Some laughed, some whispered intimately, and some, like her, sat alone, drowning in their own thoughts. And then she saw him. Across the bar, a man sat with an air of quiet dominance, his presence commanding without effort. He was striking, broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed, his dark hair neatly styled. But it wasn't just his looks that caught her attention. It was his eyes. There was something in them, something familiar. Pain, perhaps, a burden he carried, just as she did. Their gazes locked for a brief moment. And in that instant, the world around them blurred into irrelevance. It wasn't about attraction. It was about escape. James Harrington hadn't planned on being at the bar that night. In truth, he rarely indulged in such places. But something had pulled him there. An unexplainable restlessness that refused to be ignored. He had built a life of structure, of control. Yet tonight, he felt anything but. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on her. A woman who looked as though she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. He recognized that look all too well. It was the look of someone who had been let down one too many times. Someone who had learned the hard way that trust was nothing but an illusion. Before he could think better of it, he stood, moving toward her with slow, deliberate steps. When he finally reached her table, he spoke, his voice smooth yet unreadable. "You look like you could use a distraction," he murmured, his gaze never leaving hers. Emily hesitated. The rational part of her told her to walk away, to leave before she made a mistake. But tonight, she didn't want to be rational. She didn't want to be the woman who always did the right thing. She lifted her chin slightly, her voice quieter than she intended. "And what exactly are you offering?" His lips twitched, almost into a smile. "Nothing permanent. No expectations. Just a night where we both forget whatever it is we're trying to escape from." A silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. And then, Emily nodded. Just this once, she would let herself go. Just this once, she would surrender to the unknown. They left the bar together, stepping into the night like two strangers bound by nothing but pain. They didn't exchange names. They didn't ask for details. It wasn't about knowing each other. It was about forgetting everything else. The cab ride to his place was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts. When they arrived at his apartment, a luxurious but tastefully understated penthouse overlooking the city, Emily barely had time to admire it before he reached for her. His touch gentle yet firm. They didn't speak as he led her inside. As they moved through the darkened space, their breath mingling in the quiet, there was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet understanding between them. A need to feel something. Anything. Other than the ache in their chests. And so, for one night, they let go. For one night, they drowned in each other, finding solace in whispered words and tangled sheets. But the thing about moments like these is that they are fleeting. And when the morning light crept through the windows, painting golden streaks across the white sheets, Emily stirred awake to find herself alone. The warmth beside her was gone, replaced by the cold imprint of where he had been. No note, no lingering presence, just silence. And just like that, he was gone. A hollow ache spread through her chest. But she forced herself up, reminding herself that this was exactly what she had wanted. No strings, no attachments, just a night to forget. And yet, as she gathered her clothes and prepared to step back into the life she had momentarily escaped, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost something she never even had the chance to know. Weeks passed, and Emily Carter did what she always did. She moved forward. She buried herself in work, pretending that night had never happened. It had been a moment of weakness, a reckless escape from reality. She hadn't even known his name. And that was for the best. He was just a stranger, a fleeting presence in her life that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things. Or at least, that's what she told herself. But then, something changed. It started with the fatigue. The kind that clung to her bones no matter how much she slept. Then came the nausea, the relentless, inescapable sickness that made even the smell of coffee unbearable. At first, she brushed it off as stress. Her body had been through a lot lately, after all, but deep down, a nagging fear settled in her chest. And when she finally stood in front of the bathroom mirror, clutching a pregnancy test in her shaking hands, she knew. The little stick in her grasp might as well have been a ticking time bomb. Her pulse pounded as the second pink line boldly appeared, sealing her fate. No, she whispered, shaking her head as if denial could erase the reality before her. This wasn't part of the plan. She was barely holding her life together, still reeling from heartbreak, still trying to piece herself back into someone whole. How could she bring a child into this world? How could she raise a baby alone? Her fingers gripped the edge of the sink as tears burned her eyes. There was no father to tell, no number to call, just her and the life growing inside her. And in that moment, Emily made the choice. No matter how hard it got, no matter what she had to sacrifice, she would keep the baby. Months passed, and she did exactly that. She left New York behind, moving to Chicago, where she could start fresh. She worked tirelessly, balancing multiple jobs to prepare for her child's arrival. There were nights she cried herself to sleep, terrified of the future, but she never wavered. And then, on a cold December morning, Ethan Carter was born. The first time she held him, all of her fears melted away. He was small, fragile, but he was hers. His tiny fingers curled around hers. And in that moment, she knew she would do anything for him. Being a single mother was harder than she ever imagined. She had no time for herself. No room for mistakes. There were long nights filled with Ethan's cries. Mornings spent running on 2 hours of sleep. And days when she felt like she was failing. But there were also moments of pure joy. Ethan's first smile. His first laugh. The way his little arms reached for her when he needed comfort. She never regretted her choice. But she did wonder, in the quiet moments, if the man from that night ever thought of her. If he knew that somewhere in the world, he had a son. 5 years passed, and Emily Carter built a life that revolved around Ethan. She had fought tooth and nail to establish herself in Chicago, working tirelessly to ensure her son never felt the absence of a father. There were sacrifices, late nights, endless exhaustion, missed opportunities, but she had no regrets. Ethan was her world, and that was enough. Still, there were moments when doubt crept in. When she caught him watching other children with their fathers at the park. Curiosity flickering in his bright brown eyes. He never asked about his dad. But she knew the question was coming. And she dreaded the day she would have to answer it. But life had a way of bringing the past back when you least expected it. It started with a job offer. She had applied on a whim, never thinking she would actually get the position. Harrington Industries was one of the most prestigious finance firms in the country. and working there would mean a stable future for Ethan. When the acceptance email arrived, she had stared at it in shock before bursting into relieved laughter. This was it, her fresh start. Her first day at the company was a whirlwind of introductions and office tours. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she stepped into the executive suite. "Mr. Harrington will see you now," the assistant said, gesturing toward the large glass doors. Emily smoothed her blouse, inhaling deeply as she stepped inside. And then her entire world tilted. Behind the sleek mahogany desk sat James Harrington, the stranger from that night. For a moment, she thought she was imagining it, that her mind was playing tricks on her. But then he looked up, and his sharp blue eyes locked onto hers. She saw it then, the flicker of recognition. The way his expression froze before quickly smoothing into unreadable professionalism. "He doesn't remember me," she thought, a strange mix of relief and confusion settling in her chest. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice as smooth and commanding as she remembered. "Welcome to Harrington Industries." Emily forced a polite smile. Her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored to be here." She turned to leave, eager to escape the weight of his gaze. But something about his stare made her pause. James sat frozen long after the door closed behind her, his fingers unconsciously tightening around the armrests of his chair. It couldn't be. She looked exactly the same. The curve of her lips. The way she carried herself, it was her. The woman from that night. But if she was the same woman, why didn't she seem to recognize him? His thoughts swirled in chaos, piecing together fragments of a night that had haunted him for years. Had he imagined it? Or was she hiding something? There was only one way to find out. He needed to watch her. James Harrington had spent years making decisions based on logic, not emotion. He prided himself on control of his business, his life, and most of all, his mind. But after seeing Emily Carter standing in his office, composed and professional, as if she were a stranger, something inside him refused to settle. She had to be the woman from that night. But why didn't she acknowledge it? Over the following weeks, James found himself watching her more than he should have. He told himself it was curiosity, a need to confirm what his instincts already screamed at him. But deep down, it was something else, an obsession with the past, a gnawing feeling that there was something unfinished between them. And then, he found his proof. It happened during a corporate retreat in Los Angeles, where the finance team was required to attend an industry conference. Emily, ever the professional, had been focused on work, her mind far from their surroundings. But James had been watching. That's when he saw it. As she adjusted her blazer before a presentation, the fabric slipped slightly, revealing a small birthmark on her shoulder, the same one he had traced with his fingers that night 5 years ago. His entire body tensed. Recognition slammed into him like a freight train. It was her. The confirmation sent his mind spiraling. Not just with the memory of that night, but with the unsettling question of why she had pretended not to know him. Had she forgotten? Or was she hiding something? James needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he had them. Back in Chicago, the moment he returned to his office, he did something he had never done before. He ordered an investigation into Emily Carter's past. The background report was thorough, detailing her education, previous jobs, and her move to Chicago 5 years ago. But one detail made his pulse stop. She had a 5-year-old son, a boy named Ethan. James stared at the document. His breath caught in his throat. His mind raced back to the math, to the undeniable timeline. Ethan had been born 9 months after their night together. The world around him faded as the realization hit him with crushing force. Ethan was his son. His grip on the report tightened as something deep and primal stirred inside him. Emily had kept his child from him. For 5 years, she had raised their son alone, never telling him, never giving him the chance to be a father. A storm brewed inside him, anger, confusion, but beneath it all, something raw and painful. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she vanished? And most importantly, what was he going to do now? One thing was certain. Emily Carter was about to answer for the choice she had made. Emily barely had time to set her coffee down before James's office door swung open with force. She looked up, startled, as he strode toward her. His movements sharp, his expression unreadable, but the storm in his blue eyes sent a cold chill down her spine. "Mr. Harrington?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. She had seen him intense before. But this was different. There was something deeper, something almost personal. James closed the door behind him, his hand gripping a manila folder so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He placed it on her desk between them. His gaze locked onto hers with an intensity that made her breath hitch. "Open it," he said, his voice dangerously low. Emily hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as she reached for the folder. The moment she saw the contents, her stomach twisted violently. A DNA test. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might be sick. She barely registered the sound of her own breath catching before she snapped the folder shut, pushing it away as though it burned her fingers. "You had no right," she whispered, her voice laced with quiet fury. James leaned forward, his hands braced on her desk, trapping her in place. His voice was controlled, but beneath it was a quiet, seething anger. "No right?" he echoed, his jaw tightening. "You kept my son from me for 5 years. Emily." 5 years. Emily forced herself to meet his gaze, her own eyes flashing with defiance. "I didn't keep him from you, James. I didn't even know how to find you. You didn't try," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "You made a choice that robbed me of the chance to be his father." She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms as she struggled to contain the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "What was I supposed to do?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Walk into a corporate office and announce that I was pregnant with a stranger's child? I had no name, no number, no way to reach you." She shook her head, frustration evident in her features. "By the time I accepted what had happened, it was too late." James let out a sharp breath, running a hand through his hair, his chest rising and falling rapidly. "Too late for what, Emily? Too late to let me know I had a son? Too late to give me the chance to be in his life?" Emily swallowed hard, her throat tight. "I did what I had to do to survive," she said quietly. "Ethan is my entire world, James. I raised him alone. I sacrificed everything to give him a life. Don't stand there and act like I took something from you when you never even looked for me." Something flickered across James's face, an emotion she couldn't quite name. But then his jaw hardened again. "And now what, Emily?" he asked, his voice lower now, but no less intense. "Now that I know the truth, do you expect me to walk away?" He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "That's not happening." His next words sent a jolt through her chest. "Ethan is my son, and I will be in his life, whether you like it or not." Emily's stomach clenched. Her carefully built world was about to crumble. The world outside was quiet, the soft hum of the city barely reaching the cozy apartment where Emily sat, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. Across the room, James knelt beside Ethan, helping him arrange his toy cars in a perfect line. It had been weeks since the confrontation. Weeks of difficult conversations, of learning how to coexist, of James proving, not with words, but with actions, that he wasn't going anywhere. Emily had been afraid of letting James in, of letting her carefully controlled life unravel. But as she watched him with Ethan, watching the way her son's laughter echoed through the room, the way James looked at him with quiet awe, she realized something. She wasn't alone anymore. They weren't alone anymore. James looked up then, his blue eyes meeting hers across the room. He didn't say anything, but he didn't have to. In that moment, she knew. She smiled softly, setting her tea down as she walked toward them. Ethan grinned, grabbing her hand and pulling her down beside them. "Look, Mom, we built a racetrack." She glanced at James, who smirked, an eyebrow raised. "Team effort," he added. Emily let out a small laugh, feeling a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Maybe love wasn't about grand gestures. Maybe it was in the small things, the quiet moments, the shared smiles, the laughter of a child. Maybe, just maybe, they had found something real, something worth holding onto. Don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more heartfelt videos.